gonna do something a bit different today. We're gonna go into our sort of power rankings for decks in the format. These are tier one decks you're gonna want to bring to tournaments if you are looking to win. We have them ordered, but a lot of them are very close. And general disclaimer before people skip ahead: uh, this there are several different metas in Canadian Highlander. Yours may not match up with the decks here. There may be decks that are very good in your local meta that you don't see here. It's a very diverse format. Many decks can win. Just because you didn't see your favorite deck here or your pet deck here or the deck that's crushing you here does not mean that deck is not a good deck. We tried to be as meta agnostic as possible and look into various different metas, but we can only do so much, and we also have our own biases, so keep that in mind. These are coming in the wake of the January points changes. We've had some time to settle and sort of adjust to the changes. I think the changes have been mostly good. Trent, you agree?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of trying new philosophies out, and I think this is actually working a lot better than I initially anticipated. So I'm pretty happy with the recent points changes. I think they're mostly pretty solid, and if I don't mind trying stuff out, and if we find out that we took the wrong approach, then we can always just move back, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think by and large the feedback has been pretty positive. Um, so an overwhelming sort of theme for the power rankings, and you'll see as we go on, is that combo seems pretty good right now. Pretty good place. Most of the cards that went up on the most recent point change were fair cards. In fact, you could argue all of them were fair cards, and a couple of the cards that went down were combo cards. Spellseeker, Survival of the Fittest for sure, and even Soul Ring to a certain extent is a combo card. So you could argue that
Mm.
two and a half, three combo cards went down and five fair cards went up. So that maybe makes sense. Um, in general, I think aggressive strategies are not in the best spot, and that's not necessarily as a result of points changes, largely as a result of several Modern Horizons 3 cards. Frog, Barragoyf, Flage, all
This is like the whole
deep,
set.
deeply oppressive to
even
aggressive strategies.
even Tamio's like really good
Yeah,
against aggro.
no kidding.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of like aggro having a tougher time right now. Um, I don't think aggro is bad, but I think a lot of what you need to do now with aggro is really shift your mindset. I think single color aggro is really hard to pull off these days, just because specifically when you're looking at like mono red or mono white. With mono red, you have a high density of removal spells, but they're all conditional burns. Like fighting Flage or Barragoyf is just a losing argument. And then with mono white, like Death and Taxes or any sort of aggressive shell, you just have access to like a lower amount of removal. So in a larger percentage of games where they play like back to back threats of that ilk, you just aren't able to deal with them. So I think aggro is in a tough spot, but it is possible to shift and move. And one of the decks on in our power rankings uh, is a lot closer to aggro than you'd think in a lot of its starts. But we'll see as we move forward.
All right, and without further ado, we'll get into the list. And our top, or should we start at 8? Or should we
Yeah,
start at
maybe
1?
we should start at 8. Yeah, let's
All
start
right,
at 8.
yeah. Typically these things start at 8. All right. So the eighth spot we got blue black mid range. Um, the it's the best blue deck against combo. You get access to discard, which is so crucial in the combo matchup. Of course, counter spells, cheap, notably flash threats, so you don't. one of the like toughest things in the combo matchups for fair decks is whether to get a clock in play or increase your clock versus hold up counter spells or other interaction. This deck often gets to do both, and the land hate in the form of Harbinger of the Seas and Back to Basics is often just game winning in the combo matchup. They don't like you messing with their lands and mana sources, and doing so often will win you the game. For each deck, we're going to have some key cards that you can see down below. So we have the key cards in the blue-black mid-range deck as Psychic Frog, Thoughtseize, and Back to Basics. Sort of just the premier threat. I was skeptical at first when I came back to this newfound theory of pointing threats, but Psychic Frog was really the thing that got me to sort of change my mind. This card is messed up. I've been playing it a bunch at one point, and it's very good still. It's worth every point. And then thoughts. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just have to interrupt you because Psychic Frog is so good. Like, I think historically you and I haven't been shy about talking about like our philosophy when it comes to points, especially these recent points changes was pretty firmly in. We don't want to point things if we don't have to, and we feel like you need to have a really strong case to point threats specifically. Because threats can be answered, and historically in Magic, the answers have almost always been better than the threats. And then we have seen threats get better and better over time, but they still hadn't really eclipsed that threshold for you or I. But you're right, Psychic Frog is really like the nail in the coffin. I mean, playing with White Plume Adventure in previous years, like the thing for me that was the most compelling to keep it off of the list was that it's 3 mana. But like Psychic Frog to me is better than White Plume, and it's 2 mana. So
well, the big thing about Psychic Frog is it's just the best threat in your deck in literally every matchup. Like White Plume, Barrowgoyf, these other cards, they have matchups where it's not that they're bad, but they're not necessarily the best threat in your deck. Like against combo, if you're a Hate Bears deck, you'd much rather see something like Archon of Emeria than White Plume. If you're playing against combo yet again, you'd much rather see a flash threat or something that costs 2 than Barrowgoyf. But if you have Psychic Frog in your deck, there is not a single matchup where it is not the best threat in your deck, or maybe top 2.
It's it's like ubiquitously good.
Yeah, it like absolutely brick walls aggro. It's an insanely fast clock against control where you don't want to discard cards to make it bigger. It's just going to draw you a ton of cards until they answer it. It's like the best, like, or one of the best, like, protect the queen threats. Mm-hmm. If you're able to do that against combo, it's both a very fast clock because you can pitch like all your removal spells that are trash in the matchup once you realize they didn't draw Tamiyo, and it draws you cards to help get you to your interaction. Like it's just that not so 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 in every matchup.
Anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Like, you can move on to Thoughtseize, but like I just had to gush about how good Psychic Frog is, and how it like single-handedly moved the needle for you and I on pointing fair cards, and like what that means for us in terms of like how we actually measure pointing fair cards.
Yeah,
fair cards.
Yeah, quote unquote. Thoughtseize is just the prototypical hand attack spell. It's the best one. Lets you take any non-land card. Say what you will about Dreadfugue, IOK, Duress. They all miss sometimes. Thoughtseize. It doesn't really miss because if you Thoughtseize your opponent and they have no spells, that's generally a pretty good situation for you.
Pretty happy with those.
So it sort of doesn't have a fail case. And Back to Basics is the premier land hate card in this deck. The list we linked below is my list that I've been playing. It plays a lot of basics, largely because of back to basics. And if you find a good spot to land this in against basically any deck, you probably just won the game.
Yeah, I think to close out my thoughts on blue black, um it is really good against combo. Like it is so unbelievably good against combo, but it still has a lot of game against fair decks. You have your bullets in the form of Back to Basics and Harbinger of the Seas. Um, I'm going to talk about this later, but you get access to counter spells, which I think have a unique power in Highlander. Um, and your threats being flash threats, as well as a lot of them having flying. Um, Means that you have very credible fights for the initiative and the monarch. So I think blue black mid range, if you're thinking of playing a deck in your metagame, whatever metagame that is, I actually think you can bring blue black mid range to the field and expect to at least feel like you've had the opportunity to win the games that you play in most metagames. I mean, I'm sure there are some that are hostile to blue black mid range, but the deck just really has every angle covered to some extent. It isn't amazing at any one particular thing besides, I think, playing against combos specifically, but every other aspect of the deck is just very solid. And Blue and Black has gotten a lot of tools over the last couple of years that have really pushed its threat density over the edge. Like we're talking about, your Nethergoyfs, your Psychic Frogs, your Barrowgoyfs. But there have even been some standard all stars that have come in the last couple of years, like Fairy Mastermind, Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel, etc., that really add to your game plan. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think blue black is like a
totally.
really good solid pick if you like playing blue mid range decks, but you're not really sure like exactly where you want to end up. Like this is a great place to start, and because it plays a lot of basics, is just not as expensive as other like say 3-color mid range decks.
Yeah, and it's only two colors, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up on the list at number 7, we have Paradox Academy. Um, a notable finish already this year, lost in the finals of the Yellow Jacket year-end top 8 in the hands of Matt Greer. Um, he had a bunch of really busted starts that just exemplify what this deck is capable of. It's probably the best draw 7 deck in the format. Like this is one of the reasons other decks don't get to play draw 7s, is because if you draw them against a deck like this, it's better at using them than you are. Just because it has so much fast mana, um, and so many sort of I win buttons, and yeah, it's a really strong sort of density based deck with a bunch of just ways to go way over the top and win the game.
Yeah, I think with Academy, it has a lot of speed and it has really really powerful starts, but because it has draw sevens, it has the ability to like lose a couple of interactive battles, have a couple of cards eaten by thought seizes, what have you, and then still get right back into the game. And because it generates quite a lot of mana, this is one of the best combo decks in terms of the top of your library being live basically the whole game or almost the whole game. Um, there are multiple instances where I've seen Academy. They lose their first couple of threatening spells or permanents, but because of how much mana they've accumulated in the beginnings of the game, like even if their opponent has another counter spell, the third counter spell, all they have to do is draw two hits in a row, and a hit can be a lot of things too. Like it could be anywhere from Sensei's Divining Top to an actual like big artifact. Um, so I think Paradox Academy has a particular strength in it where it is it's somewhat inconsistent in terms of how fast it is, and how powerful it can be, and it sometimes does lose to itself. But it does have a lot of draws where you fast mana out into like one or two threats. If they're answered, you still have like 5 or 6 mana in play. And if you're looking at if you want to go see some of the unfair draws that this deck has, you should check out the year end, which we'll link in the description. Um, but like it gets to play 6 mana and then just rip off the top. And if your opponent isn't supplying pressure to you, like that's a very effective strategy, and you'll win a lot of games just because you had more mana than your opponent for the entirety of the game.
Totally. Up next, we have Time Vault. You're gonna start learning the theme. Another combo deck. This is typically maybe more controlling than a bunch of the other combo decks we have on the list, but still has potential for some explosive draws. Like you can still go like a lot of the Time Vault decks are on Mana Vault, so you could go like Academy, Mana Vault, play Key and Time Vault and win turn one. Like it's obviously less consistent than some of the other decks in terms of that sort of capability, but the draws exist. And it sort of gets to play a somewhat similar game to Flash Hulk in that you often tutor for your pieces and then kind of sit there for a couple turns and wait for the opportune moment to sort of finish your opponent off. You often have some controlling elements, might play some wraths, play a bunch of counter spells, play a bunch of removal spells, sort of grind your opponent out of resources, and then combo when it suits you best. There's a bunch of redundancy in terms of the B portion of the combo, which is the card that untaps Time Vault. A bunch of the Teferi / Tezzeret Planeswalkers untap Time Vault, so you get to play those as sort of value pieces that also act as a combo piece, which is really strong. Notably, this is probably one of the reasons why Urza's Saga got printed, or pointed rather.
Oh yeah.
This is probably the best Urza's Saga deck in terms of it gets a really relevant combo piece. The constructs are going to be really, really relevantly sized. It allows the deck to operate on an axis that pretty much no other card in the deck operates on. Like, if it draws Urza's Saga, it can just go on the beatdown plan, force you to deal with the beatdown plan, tutor up a combo piece, and then try to combo you if you deal with the beatdown aspect. So, yeah, another really, really potent combo deck.
Yeah, I think Time Vault, one of the things that it does the best is it's one of the best artifact combo decks that really stretches people's naturalized effects. Because it has such a solid, either a solid fair game plan in terms of making constructs or the creatures that it's leveraging. In the Time Vault list, you'll see below, we have Bright Glass Gearhulk, Market Backwalker, Mockingbird. So it has like a pretty reasonable fair game plan, and that means that you get to stretch people's like artifact removal in certain ways. So if they're playing, say, like just an Outland Liberator, for example, like that Outland Liberator is stretched. Like, do they sacrifice it to destroy the Gearhulk that's killing them, or do they like just hope that you don't have Time Vault even though you found Key with Gearhulk, right? Like, I think Time Vault is one of the best combo decks at putting your opponent into positions where they feel really, really uncomfortable with either of the lines that they play. And I actually think that leads to a lot of games where your opponent will make mistakes because they are either unfamiliar in the matchup or they just don't have as much information as you, and so they're just going to make the wrong call. And Time Vault is I find really cool because you can play more controlling versions like you were talking about as well. But I do actually think the fair creature plan is like really solid here. And Time Vault, they're like, you can outvalue a lot of decks with like your Planeswalker package, like you were talking about, the Gearhulk, etc. I mean, you're one of the best One Ring decks because you can just untap it like so many times without taking damage from all of those like turns that you would have
Yeah,
been.
it's not incremental. Like,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can draw 7 cards and take 4 damage.
Totally. Time Vault is always scary, especially when you feel like you're ahead, but you know that you have no way to interact with the combo, because you can just lose out of nowhere. So I think that's why Time Vault's our number 6. It has explosive draws, but it also has a really, really strong fair game plan. And unlike a lot of other combo decks, it interacts quite a lot with the opponent, which means that you get to pick and choose where and when you're going to interact with your opponent, which is really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Up next, we have Reprieve from the combo decks, another fair deck. Black Red Midrange, one of my favorite decks and one of the decks I've been playing the most. But the notable result we have is that Noel Robin took down the YJ year end with Black Red mid range.
Dad took it down.
Hell yeah, friend of the show. Um, and yeah, this deck um is one of the first decks I built when I got back into the format, and my list is pretty similar to Noel's. I'm trying to grind a bit more and go a bit bigger, as I am sort of known to do. But the bulk of the deck is very similar. You have a ton of cheap removal spells, cheap interaction in hand attack as well. A bunch of cheap threats with kind of like a rummage, discard, graveyard synergy theme. And I think black and red maybe have the best threats now. Like, black got so many really, really good threats recently. Like, you went over them, but Nethergoyf, Barrowgoyf, Shieldred's still in standard. Troll of Khazad-dûm is the best land cycler.
Yeah, and that one's like not really that close either. Like Troll is
Yeah,
like a lot. Well, as a creature, Lorien Revealed is obviously quite good, but
sure.
like
The
you want to
creature,
reanimate your Troll of Khazad-dûm out of the four
yeah,
creature cyclers for sure.
Harvester of Misery from OTJ special guest is super
Oh yeah,
relevant and
recently got
great in the deck.
Headliner Scarlet too. If you're playing that, also got Carnage Interpreter recently.
Metamorphosis Fanatic. So like
Oh, that's a banger.
Overlord of the Baelmark. Yeah, like almost every threat in this deck is from like the last, basically since I stopped playing Magic in like 5 years ago. Yeah, and then you just get to play red and black interactive spells, which have always been great. Red's got the cheap removal, black removal lets you kill anything. We'd be sort of remiss if we didn't talk about the Blood Moon effects again, similar to Out of Black Red. So many decks are cold to Blood Moon, if you can stick it. And Noel even included a Vampiric Tutor in his deck to go with the Metamorphosis Fanatic, but also cards like Price of Progress and Blood Moon that are often worth vamping for.
Yeah, I think one of the things about Black Red that's really interesting is what point spread do you play, right? Black actually has a lot of considerations and decisions to make, and I think depending on your metagame, it might be correct to play different point spreads, even with a very similar list, right? I think Vampiric Tutor for the top 8 was a considered decision from Noel, really valuing having that extra moon effect or access to Metamorphosis Fanatic. But you're right, Black Red has just gotten so many threats in the last like 3 to 5 years. And I think this deck has taken the sort of mantle that blue-red used to have in terms of being a strong fair deck that had great blood moons. Like Black-Red is a really, really good fair deck that also has a great blood moon package. And that's why it's in our number 5 slot for the power rankings. I think if Black-Red didn't have access to the blood moons, it would still be quite strong and you win quite a lot of games that you don't draw them. But just having that ace in the hole with an already powerful archetype is just so incentivizing. Like a lot of mid-range decks don't have that like
Oops, I win.
random oops I win spell, and Black-Red gets 2 of them in the form of Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon, and I guess like we'll call price like a half.
Yeah,
uh,
not quite as haymakery, but gets you
and
there
I mean,
sometimes.
you get Barrowgoyf, so
Yeah,
you're never that dissatisfied.
as you know, sometimes that card is a haymaker. Oops, I win too.
It's happened. I've seen it.
All right, up next, back on the combo train, we have probably your combo deck of choice, at least in recent times, Nadu.
Oh yeah.
Um, and when we say Nadu, there are a lot of different flavors, and you can sort of just shove Nadu into any creature combo deck. But the list we're linking is Spencer Kanaka's most recent list from the YJ Top 8. He lost in the semis in a really close matchup to Matt on Paradox Academy. But this deck is super strong. You can play it in, yeah, as I said, many different flavors. The typical flavor is your base white and green, and you're typically splashing blue, black, or both for various things. The sort of flavor du jour, so to speak, is to include Bright Glass Gear Hulk because it fits your base green white nature and finds some of the combo pieces in Shuko and Nomads, but also just gives you a really awesome toolbox to access. Um, this deck notably probably has the best fair game plan of any of the combo decks we're going to talk about. Is the most likely to just kill you with creatures, and has a bunch of really solid planeswalkers as well, like access to Grist, Oko, and 3 Fairy. Um, all of those cards capable of winning games themselves.
Yeah, I think one of like the reason that Nadu is my like favorite combo deck right now is, well, I love creatures, so anyone who knows me knows that I'm down for a mana elf. Um, but to touch back on something you said, Nadu's fair plan is really really strong. When I think back to say like the Spellseeker days, I was playing quite a lot of Spellseeker a couple of years ago, and you didn't really have a very strong um, game plan when you weren't comboing. It was fine. Like you could win games with your creatures and your spells, but realistically, like 80%, 90% of the games you were winning with Seeker Walk. Nadu can win the game when it's Nadu is exiled, and I think that's something that's pretty special when you look at creature combo decks. It's extremely resilient, very consistent, and has like amazing long term inevitability. And Nadu, because of it being like a very flexible creature deck, you with many creature tutors, you can adjust this deck based on your own metagame. So the Nadu list that we are linking, that will be adjusted to YJ's metagame or Yellow Jacket's metagame. My local store used to be Jer's as well, and that's a creature heavy metagame. So that's why you see say like the natural order for Atraxa, your Bristly Bills, your Scythecat Cubs. I mean those are good on their own, but you see like more creature considerations here. But if you wanted to go faster, you could. And we've seen Spencer play things like Triple Mox in the past. We've seen Seeker with Time Walk as a sort of secondary combo package for Nadu. So a large part of why I love this deck as well is it's just really flexible and malleable, and you can really adjust it and change it based on your play style and what you prefer and how fast you want to go, what you feel is correct in your metagame. And I do want to shout out Bright Glass Gear Hulk. I think that this card has really added a dimension to the deck in terms of its fair game plan that it didn't have before. And its fair game plan was good before, but I think Gear Hulk has pushed it into a different dimension. Being able to play a threat that is a credible threat that also gets either one half of your combo or like 2 1-drops that are extremely impactful, like Skull Clamp, Guide of Souls plus Ocelot Pride, etc., is really really strong. And this deck is really good at just casting Gear Hulk for its mana cost ahead of schedule as well. So I don't know if you haven't played against Bright Glass Gear Hulk, get forward or look forward to playing against it because it's very very good.
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to expound upon that you lightly touched on there is the flexibility in points, because Nadu is 0 points, and it's sort of the only combo deck in this list that has so much freedom with its points, because all the other decks sort of have the bulk of their points sort of predetermined based on the combo they're playing. You have so much flexibility with Nadu to sort of fit it into any shell you want. And I think that makes it both really powerful and really interesting and difficult to play against because you don't know exactly what options your opponent has access to.
Also, like, it can be very unassuming. If I play against someone and they play Elephant to Grist, I can't just necessarily put them on Nadu. I mean, if I'm playing against Spencer, I know that he is on Nadu, but like if I'm just at a random tournament and I play against someone and they play Elephant to Grist, like I could I could make a play that doesn't respect that they could be Naduing me, and then they just get there. But if you also look at, we'll link to the video in the description. One of our videos on our channel, um, the hoof deck that I'm playing does actually include Nadu, just because it's a free roll at this point. Like you might as well play it.
Yeah. All right. Getting into the top three, rounding out the podium, we have Flash Hulk. Um, Liam has been playing a bunch of Flash Hulk recently. It's one of his combo decks. I won't necessarily say of choice, but he will play it. It's my least favorite Canadian Highlander deck of all time to play against. I don't enjoy playing against it. On record. I have a lot of respect for it though. I think it's actively very good. Definitely got better with the printing of Samwise Gamgee and getting to really thin out the garbage combo cards that you needed to put in your deck. Not needing to put like 10 cards to loop with Karmic Guide and Revelark and sack outlets and body double, and holy crap, that was something.
And it was annoying back then when they lost like 10% of their deck to unplayable garbage.
Yeah, it was still really good.
Hmm.
And now they only lose like a third of, no, not even like 3% of their deck to unplayable garbage. Um, yeah, but this deck is so good, and it's probably the most difficult sort of pure combo deck to hate out, just because it's uninteractable on the board functionally. Like technically, you can try to kill the cat, but they're also going to have Sylvan Safekeeper in play. Um, they can do things like put Ginger Brute in their deck to have access to another food to go off before the Sam triggers resolve. Like it's planning to interact after the Hulk trigger is just a losing proposition. So you have to either interact through hand attack, through cards that prevent searching, or through taxation effects or counter spells. Like you have to be essentially very proactive in your hate or counter spells. Um, and that just
Hmm.
means it blanks so many of the cards in any deck because decks have to plan to interact on the board. And so if you're a deck like Black Red Midrange and you just draw a bunch of your removal spells, you're all but guaranteed to lose because every removal spell you draw is a dead card in the matchup.
Yeah, and Flash Hulk notably can win on the opponent's turn. So it gets play against Force of Negation that every other combo deck in the format doesn't really get.
And I was gonna say
Um,
you're actively incentivized to win on your opponent's turn because then your force of negation is live and theirs is dead.
yeah, like it there Flash Hulk also is just so consistent. Um, which is why it's really scary to play against. Um, Sometimes when you're playing and you mulligan to 5, if you're playing a mid-range matchup, like it's hard and that's tough, but you know, you can see yourself getting out of it. Maybe I draw my one ring, or maybe I draw like a key card in the matchup, or maybe I hit a Blood Moon that I'm playing and I'm black red mid range. With Flash Hulk, if you don't have a lot going on, like they're just gonna win. Like they'll just win on turn 4. Um, and Flash Hulk, to go back to what you said earlier about Time Vault, Flash Hulk does just have turn 2 wins. They don't happen that often, but it's doable and possible. Uh, I guess depending on what you're playing, they even have turn one wins with like Lotus Petal or Chrome Mox. Um, One thing I think that's really scary about Flash Hulk as well is um, there are a ton of flex slots in terms of what interaction you play. So if you're going into an expected meta and it's mostly blue cards, your Flash Hulk opponent or could be playing like Orum's Chant and Silence and Veil of Summer, etc.
Flusterstorm.
Flusterstorm. But if you're going into a creature meta, then you can tune your Flash Hulk deck to like hate on creatures by playing more removal spells. You know, your Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, Fatal Pushes, etc. Um, so with the four colors that Flash Hulk is playing, it's all four minus red, or sorry, it's every color but red. You get just like access to the best pieces of interaction that you could want based on your own metagame. So, like a large part of the reason why Flash Hulk is third on our list is because of how scary it is to play against, but it is also just really flexible into most metagames that you'd be going into. I mean, ideally, you don't want to play Flash Hulk into a really blue heavy metagame, and I'd say even if you're playing Flash Hulk against blue black midrange, the number 8 on our list, I'd say blue black midrange is still pretty heavily favored in that matchup. Um, but you still can make considerations for those metagames.
Yeah, and even depends on the blue decks. Like I would rather take Flash Hulk against most blue decks, maybe not blue black exactly, but like if a bunch of people are playing Jeskai, I'm not necessarily unhappy to play Flash Hulk.
No, definitely not. And if I'm Jeskai, I do not want to be sitting across from Flash Hulk because the onus is on me to have like the threats plus the answers.
Yeah, it puts your opponent in such a tough spot and makes them make so many tricky decisions that can, if they make one wrong decision, can just lead to you winning the game basically for free.
Yeah,
So
and like not being able to interact with Flash Hulk on the board is so big. If we look at Time Vault and Paradox Academy, they have to play artifacts, which means that things like um, your naturalized effects that are for like sort of generic combo matchups, but also are kind of good against mid range sometimes, like their Skull Clamp or their Jete or whatever. Like those end up being reasonable and good. But Flash Hulk, it literally is just discard and counter spells basically, and any I guess taxing effects. So you really put the onus on your opponent to have very specific types of interaction to join the game, right? You do this at a cost of being a little slower than some of the other combo decks. Like you're really consistent, but you don't have explosive starts as consistently as say Paradox Academy or our number 2 on the list. But I really like Flash Hulk's place in the meta right now.
yeah, definitely agreed. All right, on to number 2 on the list. And our show notes said, "This is the deck I (brackets Jer) am most scared of when I sit down across the table from it. So explosive, somewhat resilient, difficult to interact with, and it's Citadel Storm, Turbo Citadel, Turbo Ring, whatever you want to call it. It's sort of Tinker dot deck. You're trying really hard to put Tinker into your hand and then Tinker the most powerful thing for the situation into play and win via that card. That card is most often Bolas's Citadel, secondarily the One Ring. And you're sort of a hybrid artifact combo storm deck, which just leads to a lot of really broken explosive starts. You get to play a lot of really powerful cards. You get to play a ton of fast mana, both via artifacts and rituals, which is sort of what makes the deck so unbelievably explosive. You play a ton of tutors to find and cast Tinker as early as possible. Our friend, another friend of the show, Greg Van Horn, has played against Citadel Storm a bunch locally and has been on average turn 2'd through the 4 games he lost. He has lost turn 1 once, turn 2 twice, and turn 3 once. And yeah, like any deck that's capable of doing that with any regularity, like he's obviously getting the low end of the variance spectrum. Like that is the deck performing above average against him, but it's definitely the deck the most capable of putting up numbers and results like that. So
Yeah, this is the deck where if you're on a heater in the tourney, and then you sit down across from it, and they turn to you, all of a sudden you're just like, oh no, like is this how it ends? Like, is this the start of the decline? Um, I think this type of combo deck and how explosive it is something that we just don't see in Highlander that often. Um, it's the you're right. The combination of rituals plus artifact mana is what gives it its like really explosive nature. We've seen storm decks in the past, we've seen academy decks in the past, and they can have explosive starts, but this is like sort of a more all-in version of that, and that is what makes it scary. You're right. I too am the most scared when I sit down across from the table and I see and I see someone tinker on turn one.
well, yeah, because in Highlander you only have two forces. It's not like you're in 60 card and you have four, maybe eight.
Mm-hmm.
We're at 100 card and we have two. So
You
like,
don't even have that many good one mana counter spells either. Like
exactly. Yeah.
spell pierce and spell snare basically are like, and spell snare isn't even that good. It's like very marginal.
Well,
Um,
sometimes they can turn to Tinker through Spell Pierce if they just have their mana vault. Like,
totally.
so like, yeah, sometimes even that's not good enough. So yeah, this deck is very all in. Sometimes you tinker for Bolas' Citadel and you have three lands on top of your deck and you lose.
Yep.
That's definitely unlikely, but can happen.
Yeah, sometimes you mulligan too. Like with any fast mana explosive combo deck, like you'll have some hands where you know you're playing against a blue deck, and if you open your hand and it's just all rituals and fast mana but no action, then like you either have to keep it and basically tell yourself that you're willing to lose to a counter spell, or you have to ship it back, right? So I think the mulligan decisions for this deck, if you don't have hands that are like quite clear cut in terms of like how fast they are and what their game plan is, can be pretty interesting, especially depending on your matchup. So I think it's definitely when you lose to it and they are going off, it feels really really bad. But there, I promise you, there are games that maybe aren't happening to you, but are happening to them somewhere else where they're losing to their own deck. So
And
you
they
can
do
rest assured.
notably also have to play some pretty stinky cards, such as Timely Reinforcements, Sunset Revelry, Weather the Storm, Noxious Revival. Like, they are playing a bunch of cards that are, like, predominantly only good after they have Citadel in play because they are so good at putting
Mm,
Citadel in play that if you're able to disrupt them and then they draw these stinky cards, like, that also will happen some percentage of the time. So,
totally.
all right, and now on to Trent's.
Okay, I want to introduce this one. Can I
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it?
yeah. Give her.
All right. Our number one deck of this winter power rankings is Jeskai. Da 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 da. It's Jeskai midrange, everyone. It's the most popular blue midrange control deck currently, as far as I'm aware. It's not. It has not been affected by the points changes basically at all. Um, you technically lost White Plume Adventurer, but that card was
Like
very hit or
if you
miss in
were
your deck,
even playing it,
anyways.
like
Yeah, like it. Sometimes your White Plumes were terrible, so you're actually pretty happy to see it pointed on the other end, like on your opponent's side. Um, but yeah, Jeskai, it's still good. Um, if I could enter my soapbox for a moment, though, if I could hop on, uh, I think the reason that Jeskai is good is not because of recall. I actually think Jeskai is good because it uh, is extremely flexible in a format where, because of the nature of a 100 card singleton, um, our decks just aren't as consistent as we are used to in 60 card formats. Like that's just how our format works. And our cards have pretty high variable rate based on what's happening in the game currently. and I think Jeskai is one of the best decks at being able to leverage the resources that you have in ways that gain you small or big advantages over the course of a game based on when and how you use them. And recall is certainly quite good, and it adds a lot to that game plan because if you do either naturally draw recall or you have the ability to spend time to go get recall, that can be part of your game plan and it can be like sort of your own engine. Um, but I don't think recall is necessarily why Jeskai is doing very well or is even the first on our power rankings. I think it's largely due to the answer suite, both in removal and counter spells, but also your threats are just all so good. Like every threat you have has the potential to win the entire game on its own, which means that you don't have to play that many. So you actually get like I think I'm playing like 16 in my current list, maybe 18 threats, and like they're just all bangers. And you combine a bunch of banger threats with a bunch of the best removal you could ask for, with the best counter spells in the format, in a format where your opponent's cards have really high variable rate depending on what you're doing and like what you have in hand. And I think you just have a recipe for a deck that is just really strong.
Yeah, I agree with basically everything you said, except for all of your threats being able to win the game. I'm looking at Dragon's Rage Channeler,
It's
Brazen
broken.
Borrower,
It's broken.
Snapcaster Mage, like
Broken.
good cards.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Win the
Yeah.
game by themselves. Eh.
Yeah, I can admit that you almost never take your DRC across the finish line, but Darcy gets some hits in, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about Jeskai, but I just wanted to talk about how like I think that a large percentage of Highlander players look at Jeskai and from the outside looking in, it feels like okay, this deck is winning because of recall. And I'm not here to say that recall is not good. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, like, when I look at Highlander decks, I'm looking at the whole of the archetype. Like, what does the whole of the archetype bring me? And yes, I think this deck in particular is the best recall deck. But like, is it like the reason it's the best recall deck isn't because recall is so good, it's because the rest of the deck is set up in such a way that its recalls are very, very strong.
Yeah. Agreed.
Recall to 7. Oh, sorry. We
Wait,
can cut that, right?
no. I'm in. So to recap, that's our first official power rankings. We're in official like Magic fashion. We're doing a top 8. Um, However, we do have an honorable mention that given this top 8, both you and I wanted to shout out because it's one of our favorite archetypes. We both play this archetype a fair amount and are both working on it independently. A white based hate bears deck, mostly because we see a lot of combo decks, and I think a white based creature deck gives you the best matchup spread against most of the combo decks. Um, and there's sort of two flavors I like. You're more honed in on the one. I like both white red, which leans a little bit more aggressive, and then there's also Abzan, which leans a little bit more grindy slash more even more hate berry than the white red version. Do
Hmm.
you wanna talk on that deck for a little bit?
Yeah, I actually have familiarity with both. So I'll speak to Abzan and then I'll also touch on White Red. Uh, I think Abzan has a lot going for it right now. If you're in a combo heavy meta specifically, Abzan is really fast. The version that will be linked in the description is something I've been working on. It's not perfect, so I would disregard, say, like the Aether Spark. It's very good when you're ahead, but really bad when you're behind. Um, but you get access to as much combo hate as you want. So you get to play things like Deep Cavern Bat, Tide Hollow Sculler. If you want to dig deeper, you can go right into Brain Maggot or Mesmeric Fiend. You have access to there's a new card called Gas Style Raider, which is basically a Sin Collector. Um, so if you want, you have access to a ton of different hate bears that are like hand attack, or you can be playing Archon of Amirias on turn two, Thalia, what's it called? Thalia 3. Um,
Heretic Cathar.
Heretic Star, because of the mana elves that you're playing, but you also get access to a really strong fair game. This is another deck that I think has been really brought up by Bright Glass Gear Hulk. It gives you another really solid Green Sun Zenith target. Um, you get access to Grist, as well as all of the best removal in the format in white and black, as well as a couple of good green-black removal spells, Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, etc. So I think the deck is just really dynamic and has a lot of gameplay. The biggest problem is in creature decks that go bigger than you, um, which is why I think Abzan in particular, if your metagame is more combo heavy, is a pretty solid choice, because then you don't have to worry as much about the sizing of creatures. But Abzan definitely does have the does have games that it loses to just like 2, 3, 4 drop creatures that are all bigger than what you're doing, plus a timely removal spell. Um, and then to segue into white red, I was actually recently talking with 2022 Yellow Jacket Canadian Highlander champion Jack Hanukkah, and him and I were talking about Death and Taxes, because historically Jack has been playing mono white Death and Taxes with a humans package, but he's actually moved off of that in favor of white red. And initially I thought it was going to be white red splashing the red, but he's actually moved on to more of a, like, I believe it's 60-40, or maybe even 65-35, where white is the larger percentage of that pie. Um, but I think there is something to be said about the recipe of hate bears plus speed. I don't know how it ever really goes away if your meta is combo. Like the idea that you play enough stopgap creatures like Thalia 2 or Thalia 3, Archon, Containment Priest, etc., into the red cards that are really, really fast and aggressive, like Gut, Broadside Bombardiers. You get access to Price of Progress, Fourth Aerolingus, etc. That's just a good recipe for taking down combo. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Jer, because I've been thinking about it quite a bit.
Yeah, and I thought the same thing. I brewed up an Abzen list as well. I think that's the best. Looks like the best flavor to me to give you the sort of enough haymakers against combo to reliably just win that matchup, and also the sort of enough beef to compete in the have game in the fair matchups. um yeah, and I sort of came to the same conclusion that if you want to beat combo, that's one of the best ways to do it.
I I just sorry. When you said the beef, I thought to myself, well, if Golgari is the rock, then can Abzan be the beef? uh,
There you go.
what about white red? Like, where are you at on white red and white black? I think white black's very good also, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I have less experience playing and brewing those decks specifically. I agree with you that I think if you play a more aggressive slant, I would want to play white red, and then you have access to the white removal to remove sort of the most problematic creatures. You get access, and one notable thing is that red has been getting a lot more relevant hate pieces recently.
Mhm.
Um, especially since once again that last 5 years mark, but sort of after I stopped playing the first time, you get a lot more relevant hate bears. And so yeah, I think that deck is probably a reasonable choice if you want to be more proactive and more aggressive, more able to sort of punish your opponent stumbling, stop them dirtling around. Um,
Mhm.
but my inclination is to play the sort of more even matchup spread version, but still dunk on the combo decks.
Yeah, and I
with
mean like
Abzan.
Abzan, like we were talking about with some of the combo decks, it just you can edit it based on your metagame, right? Like Deep Cavern Bat is always going to be good. It's going to be solid in most of your matchups, and it's okay against mid range. But maybe you don't want to go as deep as Tide Hollow Sculler, but you're still getting access to Thoughtseize, and you're still getting access to Duress, etc. So, like, it really depends on kind of what flavor of Abzan you want to play. If you want to go a little bit bigger with like sort of a smaller Hate Bears package as like a consideration to combo, but it isn't really in the front of your mind, then you could do that as well. So I really like the flexibility that you get with just Abzan as a color trio. I think it provides a lot of malleability when it comes to how you want to attack your metagame.
Yeah, and you there's just so many cards printed now that you can change them in and out. Like for example, the list we have linked down below doesn't have Canker Bloom or Outland Liberator, but if your meta has a bunch of has a bunch of artifact combo or problematic enchantments, those are two prime candidates to slot into the deck in favor of something that maybe isn't as effective in your specific meta.
Yeah, or if Reanimator is plaguing your metagame, you could show up with more than just like a Scavenge Use and a Keen-Eyed Curator. You could also show up with Lion Sash or Nihil Spellbomb, like things you could grab off of Gear Hulk, right? Like there's a lot of different considerations you can make with Abzan, which is I think why you and I are both pretty high on it when it comes to like playing a tuned list for your metagame.
Totally.
Cool.
All right.
Well, yeah, if you want to outro us, I really appreciated talking about all this. This is really cool.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining me. I hope everyone enjoyed our first rendition of the Canadian Highlander Power Rankings. Um, I don't know how often we're going to do these, but if you enjoyed it, make sure to let us know down in the comments below. Likewise, if you disagreed with our list, if you think one of these decks shouldn't be there, or you have a deck that should be there, definitely let us know where we went wrong. Otherwise, please consider liking and subscribing. Really helps us grow the channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Peace.